Es ist eine Premiere, meine Damen und Herren.
It's a premiere, ladies and gentlemen. Today we'll only have women on stage. Welcome to the latest edition of the Digital Leaders Roundtable in the representation of Hesse in Brussels. Our topic, of course, is Women Go Digital. But it's not only a topic for women that we're speaking about today. The topic affects everyone. We know that there are big gaps in IT. 140,000 experts are missing in the German IT sector today. We can see that girls and women and girls are underrepresented. Even in the young people are researching competition, here too the female part of the population is underrepresented. So it's high time to give this topic some thought. I'm very pleased that you found your way here. It's warm and sunny outside. I'm also very pleased that so many of you are connected online. It's a true pleasure that you are giving us your attention this evening. And without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Lucia Puttrich, our Minister for European Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, together with my colleague, Professor Dr. Christina Sinemus, I would wholeheartedly like to welcome you to a very special event here in the representation of Hesse in Brussels. It's all about information and communication technology. And you will see it is true that only women are going to be on stage today. And they are going to discuss what role women can play in the information and technology sector. 90% of leadership roles
Unternehmen, die von Frauen gegründet werden. Woran liegt das eigentlich?
Why are so few women represented? What can we do? How can we promote them, and especially how can we interest them? It's all also about ensuring that young girls and women are interested in entering the sector. And it is important to also take a look at what our European partners are doing. What does it look like in other countries? How can we learn from each other? What can we do? I'd like to wish all of you an interesting event here in our representation, lots of information to take with you, and successful networking. Welcome.
Die Europaministerin Lucia Puttrich hat in
Lucia Puttrich said the decisive question, what can we do? And that's what it's about today. We want to take a look at what has to happen in order to overcome this inequality in the IT sector. I'd like to welcome Professor Kristina Sinemus, the Hessian Minister for Digital Affairs, who's going to give us a first impression of what is already happening in Hesse.
Ja, meine Damen und Herren, auch ich freue mich.
Ladies and gentlemen, I too am very pleased that we are meeting once again for the Digital Leaders Roundtable here in Hesse. This time, the topic is for tomorrow, Women Go Digital. And perhaps I'll speak about what is happening in Hesse, but of course we must also take a look at what is happening in Europe. We are here, so to speak, in the headquarters of the political future, and here too the topic women and digitalization should play an important role. So I'm very pleased that we have so many experts here from different levels. I'm pleased that we have experts from the IT sector that will be on stage with us, because if you take a look at what the current state of affairs is when it comes to women and digitalization, and you mentioned the figures, and Lucia Puttrich alluded to them too, indeed, there's room for improvement. If on the one hand, we take a look at that the ICT sector has overtaken the pharma sector, and that can be said for our state, we have almost 40 billion of sales, 130 employees in the ICT sector. And if you then sit down in a lecture at university,
das Thema Digitalisieren, Frauen und Handwerk mehr zusammenbringen, dann ist auch hier ein großer Bedarf. Und unsere Aufgabe ist es, sowohl in dem Bereich Handwerk als auch in dem Bereich IT und als auch in den Bereichen, ich gucke in Richtung Christina Kraus, die eine Gründerin ist, in dem Bereich Gründung und Start-ups hier, mehr Frauen zu motivieren und zu attraktivieren. Denn, und auch da gibt es viele, viele Studien drüber, gemischte Teams, und gerade im Digitalisierungsbereich brauche ich gemischte Teams, um Zukunft zu entwickeln und zu denken, Prozesse und Produkte umzusetzen. Gerade da ist die Weiblichkeit ein wesentliches Asset. Generell ist diese Weiblichkeit ein wesentliches Asset auch im Bereich der IT-Fachkräfte. Und wenn Sie sich das mal anschauen, so sind im Moment in Deutschland gerade mal 19% aller IT-Fachkräfte in Deutschland weiblich. Das ist zu wenig. Woran liegt das? Es liegt an unterschiedlichen Themen, die werden wir gleich sicherlich diskutieren. Ich will mal zwei nennen. Das eine ist, dass wir wahrscheinlich es nicht immer gut schaffen, den jungen Mädchen oder Frauen auch das Themenfeld schmackhaft zu machen. Weil die assoziieren mit dem Thema IT manchmal Nerds, die eigentlich nachts nur arbeiten und nicht tagsüber und nur programmieren vor ihrem PC sitzen. Habe ich selber mit meiner kleineren Tochter ausprobiert. Für die ist das IT-Thema völlig uninteressant, weil sie sagt, nö, sowas will ich nicht. Wenn man ihr aber dann sagt, pass mal auf, im Handwerk, im Schneiderhandwerk zum Beispiel, spielt das Thema IT eine wesentliche Rolle, indem ich nämlich die Modelle mir auch ganz digital vorzeichnen kann und auch die Schnittmuster ganz digital stattfinden, dann sagt die, ach, das ist aber eigentlich wieder ganz interessant. Und insofern, glaube ich, fehlt es uns da an Übersetzungsarbeit, das Thema IT sowohl im Handwerk als auch im Studium, als auch für Gründerinnen und Gründer und in Unternehmen noch einmal wirklich motivierender aufzubereiten. Das Zweite ist, Rollenvorbilder.
Role models, girls, women, possibly to have too little role models that could make it interesting for them, telling them, well, I would actually like to be a female leader in this area. And you can see that very often. Women just don't dare to. They don't have as much self-confidence. This is one of the problems, and this is where we should become more self-confident. And we can only do that by being self-confident role models, which is our task here, not just as politicians, but also as women and mothers, to serve as a role model, as an example, and say, we need more women in digitization. We want to create added value, but we want to do it in a way that you actually are happy with it. Whether it be as a leader and a founder of business, a student, an entrepreneur, an artist, or another type of member or part of a company. But at least in Hessen, and this was the question that some of us approached us with, we have already done a lot in this area. Women Go Digital was a topic that we brought onto the agenda. There's a lot of networking events in Hessen where we try to bring women into networks and make them network amongst each other. We try to bring them in as startups to find financial models as well. And together with companies, we actually create initiatives such as a video competition where we address women specifically. In this video competition, we show 3 women who have learned a digital craft in a way that could invite others of doing the same and going into that direction themselves. Maybe we can do more. What we can do more, well, that is what we're going to discuss today. One thing is certain, the future must be more female, especially in the area of digital. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would like to present our panel speakers, and I would like to invite them to come to sit here with me. I am excited to have this panel. To my left, another minister, a digital minister. You are also a minister for other areas. You're very occupied. There's also the home country and construction. Possibly you might be jealous of people who can just focus on digital all their working time. Ina Scharrenbach, you are the regional minister of the state of North Rhine-Westphalia for local government identity building and the digitization. Kristina, Sinemus, you are one of the co-founders and CEO of meshcloud. Can you believe it? I cannot read my own handwriting. Incredible what I wrote down here. However, I actually needed to look you up because you are the most important women in this company. You are creating the chief revenue. You're the chief revenue officer. Interesting that this is a woman, that you're a woman, that a woman was selected for this. We also have Professor Haya Shulman, Professor for Cybersecurity, Institute of Computer Science at the Goethe University in Frankfurt. And last but not least, you had the shortest way to come here today from the European Parliament. You are Vice President of Legal Affairs Committee. Thank you very much that you have joined us today. Marion Walsmann. Mrs. Scharrenbach, if you were invited to talk about the status quo, about the state of affairs, the current state of affairs, what would you say? Would you say it slightly differently to what I said, or is it the same for you? Well, our situation is just the same, and I think it is the same in all the regions, all the Länder in Germany, and I think we've been dealing with this for many years in our different regions. Women can become just about everything. There is no area of professions that is not open to them. And I think this is not just limited to any land. Do you have the impression that what you try to plant is bringing fruit? In many areas, I'm under the impression that, especially as far as child daycare is concerned, things are not all that easy, because at the beginning all children are curious. They want to learn just about anything, women, girls and boys. But at some point in their development, then there is less fluidity. And this is what you said as well. Digitization, what can it bring? You have a digitization in construction. If you take the construction area, information security, things that are important for every company, where you have so many priorities, well, it's a lot that needs digitization and a lot that needs women. Women are part of the creative part of the population of this world, and it's an invitation to go into those professions and take the opportunities. We heard that 19% of IT professionals in Germany are women. Germany is ranks average in this sense in Europe. What about the eagle's view on Europe? You have such an eagle's view not just on Germany, but on the entire of Europe. Well, that's a challenge, actually, that we make good use of the potential that is there. If I look back, well, I'm from Thüringen. 20 years ago, we did have a physician, a physics scientist, who was the first female leader of the Rectors Conference in Tübingen. And that was incredible. It was outstanding. It was not at all natural. And she said women, girls, from the very start should be interested, should be attracted to technical professions. And that's not just true for Tübingen, for Germany, but it's actually something that concerns all of Europe, because the German engine, but the entire European engine in terms of its economy has problems. And this is a democratic problem that can also be seen in other countries, such as Slovenia, Croatia, in all countries of Europe. And we need to do more on a horizontal level to make sure that future technicians will be available. 90% of jobs in the future will need digital competences. This is known today, and this concerns all the areas, including agriculture. We cannot just pretend it were concerning just one area of our future professions, and this is why we need to look on how to overcome the divide, the gender divide, and to make sure that we invest enough into policies so that we present good role models and harvest the potential that is there. Boys and girls might not have everywhere the same interest, but we think that cliches can also be a problem here, and we have so many competences that we should make good use of. Is there actually a logistical advantage in the eastern part of Germany, because many women there were working in manual and technical professions in the past? Well, yes, this still can be felt, because there was a lot of occupation. The occupational rate for women was very high in the past, but something did shift, because if you look at microelectronics, for example, in the past you saw a lot of women working with the fine motorical parts of this job, but the further it went up into the hierarchy like programming or digitization and networking of products and processes, and also taking decisions, well, in that area there were and are less and less men. And it's not just, well, if I might say so, that women today, they are working everywhere with tablet, computer and everything, but the quality of workplaces are different if you look at a simple office or in the area of development. And this is the decisive question here, whether what we decided in the digitization, in the beginnings of digitization, 2 years ago, we decided that 20 million IT professionals were needed towards the end of the decade, and we cannot do this without women. We need to take them on board. Mrs. Kraus, you are one of these 20% of startups, startup founders. Did you know very early in life that you would be a business founder? Was this something you wanted? Or you decided very early, and were you aware of this topic of women, men? Maybe also add some words on what you actually do. Well, I actually did not have any clarity on that. I decided it after my university studies that I wanted to be founder. I have 2 co-founders as well, and they had the idea. I was the one coming on board later on, and together we founded the entire startup. But it was quite a simple decision. I started economic informatics and economic IT, and it was quite clear for me very early. Well, I first wanted to study medicine and stopped that quite early because I realized that it didn't provide me with enough freedom and independence, and this is why I moved to another area. Founding was actually the logical consequence for me because it provided me with all this liberty and independence. It was a question of being at the right place at the right time with the right people, and thus putting these ideas in action. But I did never cross my mind to think about whether as a woman it would be the right decision. Was it the right decision? Yes, definitely. Do you think sometimes it was more difficult for you as a woman, being a woman? To be honest, not really. I think it's a great period for female founders, for women founders now. It's a great moment because on one hand we have a lack of professionals and our economies are lagging behind. Many decisions are right now being decided, taken for our future in the area of energy, banking, etc., etc. So I think it's really important that we do co-create these decisions at this moment in time. So for you, it's actually the logical consequence, and you do have this self-confidence that was mentioned by the minister. That is a good role model. Thank you. Mrs. Shulman, what part of students are women, girls? And did you also have the impression that you're a pioneer, being a professional, being a professor in this area? We do not have many women, not enough. Most of them are men. I also agree. I think that role models in society are very important. We need more of them, but there is another problem. We need more family friendliness in Germany, more children daycare. You talked about the former Eastern Republic of Germany, and in fact there what was this was handled differently. Nowadays you actually have to decide whether you want a career or whether you want to found a family, and many want a career, and this is why they decide against having a family. We say the woman decides to have a child, yet she has done university studies, and then she's sent home, has to stay at home for at least 3 years before having full-time child daycare. But after 3 years, very often she doesn't even receive it. It's only part-time, and then sometimes receives the money. But it's really complicated. What about the job you leave behind? What about your possibility to come back? What about childcare, the hours? This woman, having spent 3 hours of her life at home, not having had the possibility to further develop in her sector, in her profession. Of course, these women have less possibilities. Of course, they don't dare to actually accept such job offers because they are mostly full-part jobs. There are just no half-time part-time CEO posts. They don't exist. There is no part-time for a professor. What can you do? I think in Germany, and I myself am from Israel, so for me it's really very clear what the problem is in Germany, because I've experienced it myself. I have 3 children. They're 3, 4.5, and almost 7 years now. And childcare is so unreliable. There's so many problems. It's so unreliable. You know how many times I had to go to Berlin, and on the way to the airport I had to cancel everything because I was called by the daycare center which called me and they said, well, I don't have enough stuff today, so you have to come and pick up your child. This is just not possible. How can you do what you need to do if everything is cancelled? I myself wasn't able to go to meetings every day. I sometimes chaired a conference with my child on my lap. I know firsthand what the problem is in Germany. This must be changed on a political level. Otherwise, these women just won't have any possibility, any opportunity. How can you be as successful as a man if you have to work through the nights? From my own experience, you're just less efficient and less concentrated when you're tired, and so many more things. I think the problem is that that Germany is not sufficiently family-friendly. Child daycare is not sufficient. And this leads to a situation where women, even if they'd want to, they just don't have the possibility. Do you know how many times a student comes to me saying, I have a child, could I please work? I'm not even asking for payment because I know that I just cannot work as much as the others. And I say, no male student came to me asking for an unpaid job. But women do that because they just know they have no opportunity. I have 3 excellent women in my chair within my area. One of them, excellent women, one of them had a small child, and when she came to me, she said it could be unpaid. She would accept an unpaid job. And I've never heard that before. This is the main problem in Germany. And in my country, from where I come from, it's different. We have so many possibilities. Women can decide whether they want to come back 6 weeks after the birth of their child. They can, but they don't have to go back to work. A woman can take a year if she wants as well, but she could come back to work. And I think it's important that women are offered this choice, which they don't have in Germany. Thank you very much. It's absolutely important what you said, that there's no choice. We have a terrible number from a study from the European Commission. 90% of IT university students actually leave at the age of 45. I think, unfortunately, you're not the right minister to ask this question now, to answer this question now, because, of course, in politics, if you want to move something in the area of leading in policy, you really have a difficulty answering.
No, I'm the right person to be asked this. And I started this initiative because I do have this knowledge, this experience. In '96, I founded my first company. In '97, I had my child. In '92, I had the second one, and it was difficult. I raised them alone. I worked in Darmstadt back then, in the Innovation Center, and I told the facility manager back then, you know what, we need childcare here in these premises because we want to have more and more startups here. And then he said to me, you know what, you won't be successful with your company anyway. You're a woman, you're raising your children alone. Why should we have childcare here? We have sufficient public kindergartens. That was kind of my introduction. And not a whole lot has happened over the last 25 years. Some things have happened, but I believe that it's not only about saying the woman must stay with the child. My later husband also took care of the children. And I think this needs to be observed from a societal perspective, and it is important to offer opportunities. And one way is to deal differently with mobile working. This is an opportunity we have today. 25 years ago, this was not the case. Secondly, we need a flexibilization of the work time planning. That too is possible with digitalization. And that is why digitalization, from my viewpoint, is a real opportunity to allow for another approach when it comes to balancing family and work life. And that's also an opportunity to give courage to female founders to say family and job can be united, also thanks to a more flexible working time and working location. And if I take a look at the last decades, I also have to point out that men have increasingly been taking parental leave, and we should certainly encourage that too. And I think that this is a view of the family that is changing little by little. Do any of your founders have children? Yes, my colleague has 3, but he's also a man. Yes, that's true. Do you already have employees? Yes, there's almost 40 of us now. And we already have had quite a few people taking parental leave, both men and women, and this works well. You simply have to plan it in. When you're 8 or 9 people, it's somewhat more difficult when one person cannot work for a few months, but as of a certain number, this is manageable. And of course, it is also our task to support people to take parental leave and to also offer people flexible working conditions that they require to be able to handle this in parallel. Even though I have to say, we've had quite a few people who decided to move out of the Rhine-Main region back to their parents or godparents because they didn't have childcare for their children, and that was then the better option for them. They continue to work for us, but they do it now from Baden-Württemberg or Schleswig-Holstein, for example. And this, of course, has become possible because of digital work. 10 years ago, they would have probably said goodbye to you or the other way around. How do you see it with childcare? We can talk a lot about women. You are responsible for quite a big ministry, but that isn't part of your responsibilities. Are there discussions? Are there any plans for the future? The problem has been described correctly. Of course, it also depends somewhat on the sector in which you are working. If you work in production, for example, then you need reliabilities. The more service-oriented it becomes, or the more digital your work becomes, the more flexible you can be. Now, the laws are keeping pace with the digitalization of the workplace when it comes to mobile working, when it comes to flexible working. Younger people are also working differently than older people. And a lot of it also depends on how managers handle this. Ms. Kraus alluded to it. There are big companies that are very hierarchical, and in these, it is often more difficult than in companies where the hierarchy is a lot more flat. My thesis would be the following: that we should make money available for childcare, because that allows for more planning, that allows for more reliability, both for the parents and the companies. And it also needs to be clarified who is responsible for what. Because, of course, parents have the duty to raise their children, and that is why it needs to be clearly clarified who does what if childcare is offered. Now, there are issues here. If, for example, the childcare provider closes his doors or her doors at 4 or 5 p.m. and you cannot make it, then, of course, you all of a sudden have the question and the difficulty of how you're going to manage to pick up your child. That is a circle that we need to exit. We need more solutions because children are part of our society. They are our future. So we shouldn't make life unnecessarily difficult for our parents. And that is why we require decisive changes of paradigm when it comes to the question, where does money flow? For Germany, it would be a huge revolution if we brought about changes here. And it would, of course, simplify our way into the future. Because we want to attract a lot of workers also from other countries to Germany, and they often come from other countries where things can be taken for granted, but not in Germany when it comes to childcare. And that is why this is a huge transformation process that society has to be subject to. And as the public hand, we also do not make it easy for our founders. When you take a look at all of the call for tenders, generally, all kinds of references have to be brought along. But if you've just founded a startup, you cannot bring along these references. And especially when it comes to public administration, the GAF startups are incredibly important because they come about with so many fresh ideas and possibilities. And it's almost impossible to get them into the processes because these public tenders basically exclude all startups. And that is why this tender law, which was implemented in Germany from the European level, doesn't match with the question of how to become more digital, because, of course, it limits opportunities and possibilities. And these two are points, in my opinion, that we need to consider and ponder about. You said that digital relates to everything, and yeah, the digital civil service could be an event in itself. But it's the same thing in companies. If you have a workforce that grew up differently with their occupation and then has to adjust, then you'll always have people who say, what, in 3 years I'll be retired, leave me alone. Which of course is understandable too. And I always laughingly say, well, if you have a butcher today, he's not going to be able to bake breads tomorrow. It simply doesn't work. So you need a lot of power, a lot of new young power. You need experience, power in the IT sector as well, especially in public administrations. And we're not managing this. There's also competition. But as a citizen, I can only go to the one administration that is responsible for me. Now, there's some catching up to do for everyone watching us on their screens. After the discussion, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. Simply go on streamline at lv-brussels.hessen.de, but you can also call us on the hotline. That you see here on the screen. Mrs. Weissmann, you were nodding. How do you see what was just described from the European prism? Well, I think it's good that we have a lot of best practices examples in Europe that allow us to learn. That would be my first point. Secondly, the employers are going to have to do something because the war for talents might create a dynamic that we haven't observed in the past. I myself, too, was an employer, and typically, back then, you'd have a room, you know it, if you have children, they sometimes are sick, and then they feel better, but then they're not able to go to school. Well, why not have a room in the company where you can take the child along, the child can play there, is busy, but at the same time, you're able to do one or the other thing. Flexible digital workplaces. That's the key word. During the corona pandemic, we learned that we can deal with video conferences and can take care of things digitally. And that is not going to be different in the future either. On the contrary, that is going to increase. And to be honest, the disadvantage you're describing, absolutely right. This one already starts when women go to get trained. When you take a look at vocational training, well, women are disadvantaged when they have young children. So this becomes a difficulty too when it comes to training and education of vocational training. And here too, there is the possibility to offer online trainings, for example. This would ensure that the required adjustments are offered to the people that require them. And a lot has changed already. Today, the partners want to have equal rights when it comes to raising, but nevertheless, childcare premises are still required. And you mentioned another big hurdle. Here too, movements are required. In the European Parliament, we launched a few programs where it's all about role model functions, about mentoring. It's all about successful female founders and successful female trainers take other women on board in order to encourage them. Fact is that women often, you alluded to it, don't sufficiently trust themselves, and that is why women need to be encouraged. And they need to be encouraged and asked to apply. You described this perfectly beforehand. It perhaps also need to be simplified for them with specific networks. The degree of networking between female leaders is lower than amongst male leaders. It has grown and is going to change, but that is something that we should focus on. The funding of a startup. I was listening attentively. I heard again and again of women founders who, when they go to their bank with a business idea in order to ask for funding, well then, the women founders or the creators of a company, especially in the digital area, well, they struggle a lot more to obtain funding than men founders would when trying to obtain a credit from the bank. Of course, it might be better if the director of the responsible party of the bank is a woman, but that is not something you can choose. So here, with the help of role models, with the help of encouragement, and with the help of special programs, gaps can be filled. We have a gender gap. We are currently in the process of overcoming it, but it is not going to happen by itself. And if we wait until the demographic pressure is so high, then we'll be lagging behind in the world. This is something we cannot afford, which is why we need to be active now in order to find solutions to these issues. And I always say that all of it already starts in the kindergarten or in schools, where role models are already observed by children. Have you already experienced this in a bank, or were you always faced with male colleagues? Well, it's difficult for startups when it comes to banks because they're not always keen to support risky startups. But 87% of investment funding go to male teams, 1% to women, and 12% to mixed teams. So we do see a huge difference here. We have financed ourselves, so I didn't experience this personally, but I think the numbers speak for themselves. And most of the investors are men too. Mrs. Shulman, would you consider yourself a role model? We heard a lot about these so-called role models. Would you consider yourself to be one? Do you have the feeling that amongst your students that it's very important to have a woman professor standing in front of them? Well, firstly, I'd like to say that this event and that all of the initiatives that the minister is supporting are extremely important because that is what is going to bring about change. And I know Kristina Sinemus personally, and I know that she's doing a whole lot for women in the ICT sector as well as in the STEM sector. These are really important initiatives. And I know that I am a role model. That is the case when you are successful. I'm not sure how I managed, despite of all of the challenges I had to overcome. I have quite a few stories where I took part in very, very important meetings without having slept at all. But the bottom line is that I am a leader in my area, and I have applications from all parts of Germany, but also from Israel or from Switzerland. My work is well known. Cybersecurity, right? Yeah. I do research in the area of applied cybersecurity, and we find all kinds of vulnerabilities, problems in systems that could be abused in order to attack systems. We detect attacks also on German infrastructure, but also at a global scale. But our focus are German infrastructures, and we examine what the attack vectors are and what the hackers and the criminals are doing, what the main issues are. And then we also ponder over what needs to be done in order to improve security. If you understand the attacks, it is much easier to understand what needs to be done in order for the situation to be remedied. And our work is not only presented in leading conferences, we are also invited to hacking conferences, including Black Hat, for example. We have won a number of prizes. We find weaknesses of big producers that then offer us money so that we don't produce this. I'm not going to drop any names here, but I am one of the best in my area. And it is important, too, for me that students are successful. And I can tell you that my students are top students, and they immediately receive offers in the industry after finishing university, but also in science. And I think we need more of them. And I think for this, we need to create the right conditions. Childcare is one thing, but there's more to it. There are countries that do have childcare offerings, but still don't have sufficient women working in these sectors. So I think there's two things here that need to be changed in parallel. It is important that we have reliable childcare. It is important that we have more of these offers. Until not too long ago, I had to drop off the children 1.5 hours away from me because I had 2 children and they were in different childcare facilities. So I spent most of my day driving, didn't have much time left to work. So the problem is significant. I also see this amongst my students in my lecture hall. And at a political level, of course, a lot needs to happen. Mrs. Sinemus is not going to be able to manage all of that herself. Politicians need to know what services there are for childcare, how many hours you receive, what are the whole statistics, and only then can you calculate how much women can work. Because to simply say, we want to offer jobs to women, nobody's applying, what can we do? That doesn't suffice, of course. The situation needs to be understood firstly. Only after that can you find solutions.
Thank you very much. It's refreshing that you say, I am the best, because usually that's men saying this. So you are a true role model in this sense. Mrs. Sinemus, a reaction from your side, but another question to you. We are in Europe. Do you have a wish list for Europe? First, I would like to say something else. We said that we need the topic family friendliness, childcare. We agree on that. We must do definitely more. Secondly, motivation, role models that we must create and that have to be self-confident role models. Again, she is the best in her area, as she said. Why shouldn't she say it? And this is the sort of role model we need. Thirdly, what we need to focus on more and make visible, we need to integrate the topic early enough into the education system, which we did in Hessen, and I'm very proud of that. We said that there's a new course in the classes 5, 6, 7 on a horizontal level, digital worlds, which we introduced in the curriculum, school curriculum, where we make the digital tangible. And you see, for example, that boys hammer on a smartphone, they destroy it, and then they check which part goes where. Well, girls programmed a robot and looked at whether it was able to move left, right, or straight ahead the way they programmed it. So you can see that on a cross-gender level, there is motivation and the courage to actually go there. You only develop it when you can make tangible experience. And this is what we need to do. We need to create tangible experiences for girls so that they can also experience that. That is an area that interests them and where they want to move professionally speaking. And you don't need just to make a course in the curriculum, but you need to make concrete offers. And you need to have people who work in that area go to schools and talk to girls and show them that in the craft sector they actually they made a living out of that, and that it's not necessary to go to university. At this point, I would like to ask the two persons sitting on our podium, sitting on the panel, and having actually studied IT, and ask them for feedback. You said that you did study medicine at the beginning and that didn't provide you with enough liberty and independence. Was there someone in your environment, personal environment, who said, well, that's it's a bit like a nerd, so what feedback did you receive? Well, I wasn't actually sure. It wasn't the most direct path because in school I actually did not have any contact with IT, programming or anything of that area. So we had a big book with all university curricula at school that we could flip through, but it actually didn't offer us any insight into what that would lead to. So once I had stopped medicine at university, I looked at programming through graphics. I did program animations myself, and this offered me an insight. And I said, well, I don't just want to study economics because I actually wanted to have something more concrete. And this is what led me there. And in your case, Mrs. Shulman, well, I didn't know any other profession. I grew up with computers. I was in Israel. I actually worked in the army in my country and dealt with informatics there. And afterwards, I studied informatics in the army as well. I was the only woman in that area, the only woman in my team. So there were not much women in IT in the army as well. At university, you had maybe 40% of women, but already on a master's level, on the MA level, less. And then again, I was on my own. I finished this on my own. But in Germany, I think you have to look at it from the point of view of family friendliness. But everything that you do here is so important. We do need activities. We do need role models. We do need, what you just said, a tangible experimental level where women can actually get a tangible experience of these technical professions. A woman might have never had the opportunity to do it. So she thinks, well, in those conferences, you only see men playing with these things, so it's nothing that could be interesting for me. You need to make it tangible for them. On my personal wish list, I'd say we need to put more energy and intensity in orienting people into the professions, because many just don't know what opportunities there are. In the area of medical technology, it is not known what challenges there are on a digital level, or in crafts, or in pharmaceuticals, in the pharmaceutical sectors. That's where you have most of them, or also in the financial services sector. There's so much digital, so much functioning on a digital level there. So we need a more practical professional orientation program, and we need to give people the opportunity to see what their opportunities are in the technical area and what opportunities will be open to them after going into a certain direction. Also, we need, of course, more financial support, which we did already put into the Erasmus Plus package, in order to be able to send people abroad so that there they can gain tangible experience which they can bring back into their own country, and to look across the borders what is happening in other countries. And I think that's really something that's working well. My wish list for Europe. I must say that I was also AK president prior to being a politician. And if you look at how many professions there are and how much the numbers have grown in this area, that have that actually have a digital area as well. There are more than 300 new professions. I also remember once I handed over the craftsman certificate to a woman building which was in a very concrete job, and she said, well, actually all I do is working on an app for others that are in my profession, which was a big surprise to me. One of my wishes to Europe is more in this area. And then the second, which I agree with my colleague Ina Scharrenbach on, we need more. We need less red tape in the area of access to professions and job openings. We must not make things in a totally inefficient way. Once we had a project with 42 partners, and of course, because of the relevance of the topic, we needed a gender expert. But all she did was making more work, creating more work. For us, it would have been more interesting to say we want to build a women network and bring the network value into Europe and not just create more bureaucracy. And this is what we need. We need more networking and less bureaucracy, being more agile, being more flexible, and reacting faster. Thank you very much. And this is where we move into the discussion. A lot has been said. I think there's a microphone that can be brought to the gentleman, Mr. Voss, in the first row. Please also say, Mr. Voss from the European Parliament, whom you're addressing your question to. No, I'm actually Christian Fries from the Crafts Chamber. Thank you for everything you said. I have 3 questions, and then we can see whom they're best addressed to. The worst happening is bureaucratization everywhere. Red tape, red tape, red tape. And thanks to the different decisions, we actually have ever longer obligations to keep documentation. There is no trust, and the biggest fear, actually the biggest blockage, is fear of bureaucracy. And this is where I really encourage everybody to have more courage in the economy and to reduce red tape. Secondly, childcare. In fact, that is a topic where they all come to us. In Frankfurt, we have tried to do things with the crafts companies. We have to try it helping, but in Germany, kindergarten places are redistributed according to where you live. So you cannot even allow people to have their children in a kindergarten at the workplace because it's not possible, legally speaking. Thirdly, childcare again. If I try to make this more flexible, bureaucracy is always there in the background saying, well, you need so many children, you need such a room, you need whatever, if you want to enable this at the workplace. So in actually fact, it's very difficult to create a situation where you can bring your child to the workplace. I agree that women can do technical professions just as well as men, but we need to bring this into the schools. We need to create contact points between the schools and people who are already working. We are in an area where there are people who don't even know that there is a hammer. It's part of the development that we have, and the digital world is actually leading us in this sense as well. Another question to Europe: can we please abolish this nonsense of bureaucracy? I would love to have a year of reduction of red tape. That would be amazing and would create so many workplaces, so many jobs. And for you, please do say more of what wonderful things you're doing, because that will bring in more young women into the areas. Thank you.
I'm not sure who feels addressed. You're going to have to respond to this on behalf of the whole EU. No. Just a brief sentence about the question of bureaucracy. Mr. Stoiber alluded to the bureaucracy. There's a bureaucracy moratorium of the EPP group where we said we cannot have more reporting obligations, especially after the corona pandemic. We have more important things to do now. We need to catch up. We need to do other things. And we invite the Commission to orientate itself based on that. We are no longer going to play along in the European Parliament, including no new authorities. You will recognize this based on our voting behavior. However, and perhaps I'll throw the ball back to you now, Abtaj, if companies and associations come to us, they always want everything to be regulated and detailed precisely, which in turn then again leads to more bureaucracy. So here too I say a tad more self-responsibility and courage. Germany lacks courage. In Germany we are very overregulated. So it's somehow we need to get there together. Less bureaucracy, more effectiveness, and more oriented based on the practical reality. I also heard that Mrs. von der Leyen asked for the reporting obligations to be lowered by 25%. This is currently being scrutinized, but from what I've heard, not a whole lot has been found hitherto. So we'll be curious to find out if something is going to be presented next Wednesday when it comes to reducing red tape. Do we have further questions here in the room? Any comments? Yes, please, here at the front. If you would briefly introduce yourself.
That is usually during weekends or during evenings. Very important is what you touch is access to finance. I still remember I participated to a debate, and there was a lady, and she was a co-founder of a startup. And she said when she went to speak with the business angel, to her, the question was what you see as a risk of this startup. To the male partner, they ask, what is the opportunity? So there, you already see that these angels can be very biased. Startup is a subject in itself, because startups is based on a very fast growth, which means a lot of workload in a very short time.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's already a lot of points you brought.
Very last thing is artificial intelligence, which we didn't touch. We are programming the next world with artificial intelligence. It's important that there is a presence of women in giving values of this artificial intelligence. Thanks.
Just a short comment. I totally agree in your comment on cultural switch. But at the end of the day, cultural switch is a matter of time. And if you say we want a cultural switch, you do not have it at the next day. So we need a bit more on time, but we have to have it in our mind. And law should motivate the cultural switch.
Okay, dann hatten wir da eine Frage, die Dame.
Ja, also ich bin total begeistert. Mein Name ist Dominik Chantal Pontani. Ich bin hier Vertreterin vom Landesfrauenrat Hessen. War sehr, sehr interessant. Ich würde mir etwas...
This has been very interesting. I would wish for more concrete steps that we can undertake. I'm not here only on a voluntary basis. I myself am an entrepreneur and the mother of 5 children, aged 16 to 33. I also have 2 grandchildren. I know this topic of digitalization in all areas. For my employees, I ensure that they have sufficient childcare, etc., etc. So I do a whole lot when it comes to this topic. But my feeling is that childcare hasn't progressed. On the contrary, things are getting worse. You spoke about the 2-3 hours you lose or you lost every day in order to ensure that your children get childcare. That was a great example. And then we also have to accept that multitasking is difficult at home when it comes to uniting childcare and working. Vocational training has been mentioned. I see no progress here either. I'm a parent representative in my school. I visited the first classes in C64 back then. And the teachers, some of the teachers still can't work with computers, so how are they going to teach this to children, especially the girls? So what I am lacking here is a concrete vision, a concrete implementation that I can take with me to Hesse to say, here, this is what is to be implemented in order to do justice to these problems. I need to somewhat contradict you. I just said it, that we have the course Digital Worlds that we have introduced in schools in Hesse. Pardon me? Total of 18 schools. It's now going to be expanded to 52 schools. We created an office that helps develop competences. We have the topic Women Go Digital in order to also set up a network together with craftswomen and craftsmen. We are very busy with supporting training and education. So we do have a number of concrete projects that are running, so a lot is happening. But of course, more work is required when it comes to these topics. It doesn't suffice to say, okay, we've talked about it, that's it, done and dusted. No. It's always about triggering as much as possible in your own environment too, and that also includes simply speaking about it and doing it. Ms. Weissmann. Europe doesn't have all of the competences when it comes to this question, but we have the structural fund, let's not forget it. From the European Social Fund, a lot of measures are being promoted that support the development of competences, that support education and training, etc. Every member state and every state within countries have access to this. And one of the focus areas is the transfer to the digital world. So I can only recommend everyone to take advantage of this. Frank Schwalber-Roth is my name. I was the first Green Member of Parliament in Hesse. And my question relates to what happened 43 years ago. Back then, the Green, the party was founded, and I was one of the representatives that fought to introduce quotas. We all know those that are against it and those who are in favor of it, but nevertheless, something happened in politics because of that. Without the introduction of the quota amongst the Greens back then, well, amongst the Greens, but also in other parties, there wouldn't have been such a pronounced increase of women. And this leads me to my question. In what areas could it be helpful, this is also something concrete, in what areas would it be helpful to introduce quotas? Kindergarten, schools, or even in early child care. What is your view of quotas? Of course, you're saying that at my university, in order to get a diploma, you need to be incredibly gifted and successful. But in what area could we have successful experiences with quotas?
I actually didn't know that it were the Greens who introduced it. I think quota are important. At the beginning of my career, actually, I was against it because I thought that actually creates feeble women or brings in feeble women. But you know how many feeble men there are. That I can tell from my experience how many feeble men there are. The point is there's so few women. Of course, the more women we bring in, the more strong women we will have. Quota are important. Where? Well, everywhere, in all areas where there are not enough women. At universities, for example, I can tell you that very often we see differences between how the men talk to candidates who are women or men. When they have candidates who are men, they actually talk to them as they would with colleagues. And when they have candidates who are women, they talk to them almost like babies. And the reason for this is that they are underrepresented. If there were women in the different committees, then you would actually have more women also in appealing institutions, appealing committees, then you would have more women appealing as well. If there is a woman coming who is really qualified and just as qualified, maybe overqualified with comparison to the men, there will also be a reason that will be found why she's not taken. Of course, there's the factor of children, childcare, child incompatibility. So very often men are selected for this reason. But in my area in Germany, I can definitely say we need more quota for women. Thank you to the Greens, because I didn't know that you were the first. The last questions from the public. A woman. I will try to make it short. I'm Gendrado Plena. I'm from the health agency in Vienna, the representative of the legal service, and I would be interested in hearing more about tender procedures on the legal level and in the regional area, in the different tender documents. Women and innovation are supported. Women are encouraged to take part. But on a national level, in the different tender platforms, for example, there is innovation and digitization which is supported, and there's a lot happening. Now, I would ask for the European level to recognize it, to see it, that more should happen on a legal level there. I would like to say something concerning quota so that you won't go back home without it, I was a minister for legal affairs, and in that sector there are actually more women than men in our, and in according to Tübingen's equality law, we actually would have to bring in more men so that they can be represented on an equal basis. But of course, it is important that there is more selection, that no quota is needed, because we would like things to happen in a natural way. But it must be said that we have created a quorum so that women have equal opportunities at the start, and it is necessary. As far as tender procedures are concerned, thank you very much for intervention. Of course, it does happen, and we need to do a lot, especially in the interior market, in the single market. We need to look at thresholds. Not everything needs to be done through a European tender. Food in a daycare center, for example, or in a kindergarten, that must not be tendered on a European level. But I am quite sad looking at the latest decision that was taken, where good tender procedures were actually taken out and the focus came back to a European level with a lower threshold amount regulation. I think the threshold should be looked at, but you said the right thing there. There are criteria, tender criteria, that make it possible to look at regional particular situations, and we do not make sufficient use of them. Thank you very much. A lot is happening and a lot remains to be done. I would like to hand over to our minister for the final words. Yeah, thank you very much. A lot has happened, a lot needs to be done. We are still at the very beginning, and I think today we've seen different approaches, different areas in which to work, whether it be tenders, networking, childcare, financing. At the end of the day, however, it is mainly finding the courage to motivate, especially as far as women are concerned. And to integrate your question, the less quota, the better, and the more qualified women, the more women will be found, will be able to be motivated to come into leading positions. I think this is where we need to work together. That means talking together, putting things in action. This is why I'm happy that so many have come here today. I thank all the women sitting on the panel today. And I think we did show that Women Go Digital is possible, and we gave other women courage to go into this direction into the future.